Good morning. Thank you for joining me in this morning mindfulness practice. As a certified Proctor Gallagher consultant, I study every morning the material of Bob Proctor and Sandy Gallagher. Bob Proctor studied books like Think and Grow Rich for 60 years. I was fortunate to be mentored by him before he passed away a couple of years ago, and I love teaching his material. So you'll notice most of my morning mindfulness practices include stories that Bob Proctor taught or things I learned from him. One of the most important things he taught was the importance of making a decision. He would say you can have anything you want, but you must decide. You can have anything your heart desires. You get to choose. But rather than letting your mind run all over the place and have a million things going on and think about all the reasons you can and all the reasons you can't, just decide. And there's a lesson worth sharing written by Bob Proctor called Decision. Bob writes, "The subject matter that I'm about to share with you could have an enormous impact on your life if you will take the time to review what I'm about to share with you 2 or 3 times so that it sinks into the depths of your mind. There is a single mental move you can make in a millisecond which will solve enormous problems for you. It has the potential to improve almost any personal or business situation you will ever encounter, and it could literally propel you down the path to incredible success. We have a name for this magic mental activity. It is called decision. I suppose there are a number of subjects that school neglected to teach us. One that stands out above the rest is decision. Definite decision. The major weakness of all educational systems is that they neither teach nor encourage the habit of definite decision. Napoleon Hill wrote an entire chapter on the subject and suggested it is the only way to master procrastination. The habit of indecision acquired because the deficiencies of our school system goes with the student into the occupation he or she chooses, if in fact they choose their occupation. Generally, a youth just out of school seeks any job that can be found, taking the first position they find because they have fallen into the habit of indecision. 98 out of every 100 people working for wages today are in the positions they hold because they lacked the definiteness of decision to plan a definite position. Napoleon Hill made it very clear in his writings that definiteness of decision always requires courage, sometimes great courage. A friend and business colleague, Dr. Carol N. Hildebrand, wrote a couple of paragraphs on decision that I believe should be chiseled in granite and placed on the grounds of every educational institution worldwide. She said, "There is a corollary element that must go hand in hand with the decision, and that is commitment. It must be a committed decision." Bob Proctor continues, "Most of us have weak decision-making muscles. We do not even recognize what it means to make a real decision. We fail to realize the force of change a truly congruent, committed decision makes. Part of our problem is that we use the term decision so loosely that it has come to describe our wishes, not our commitments. Instead of making decisions, we state our preferences. The word decision comes from the Latin roots de, meaning from, and cadere, meaning to cut. Therefore, a decision means cutting from any other possibility. A true decision then means you are committed to achieving a result and then cutting yourself off from any other possibility. Committed decisions show up in two places, your calendar and your checkbook. No matter what you say you value or even think your priorities are, you have only to look at last year's calendar and checkbook to see the decisions you have made about what you truly value. Bob goes on to say, for example, I am committed to growth, both professionally and personally. A review of my calendar always shows multiple continuing education courses, seminars, and workshops in both the personal growth area as well as in my profession. My checkbook is filled with tuition disbursements, purchases of books, and videos. Bottom line, see how you have reserved your time. Look at your expenditures. Those are the roadmaps to the decisions you have made in the past. After making a true decision, especially the tough ones, we usually feel a tremendous burden has been lifted from our shoulders. Oh, that is so real and so true. You can't even imagine the relief that comes when you make a committed decision and you just trust the universe. I worked for 39 years in the insurance industry, and for the last 5 years, I felt a calling to do this, to do something else, to give up paying benefits for people injured in vehicle accidents and to do something that I loved. But for 5 years, I was in mental anguish, worrying about where the money would come from, worrying about where the clients would come from, worrying about what people would say. What would I do? I couldn't leave a good government job with pay and benefits. It felt like I was jumping off a cliff. Why would I sabotage my good government paycheck and benefits for the unknown? I was afraid of change. I was afraid of the unknown. I was worried and locked in a mental prison of my own making. When Bob Proctor talked about decision, I thought it can't be that easy. But I decided I don't know how, but I felt like if I jumped off that cliff, I would develop wings on the way down. And that's exactly what happened. I quit my good government job on Friday, the 13th of October, 2017. And 6 months later, on Friday, the 13th of April, 2018, I was sitting in Bob Proctor's living room. Friday the 13th used to scare me, and I chose Friday the 13th as my last day of work because I thought, what is scarier than that? If I'm going to quit my good government job of 39 years, might as well make it Friday the 13th. And then life totally turned around. When I made that decision, it was like I could breathe. I had a new life. I could do whatever I wanted. And I became a consultant doing what Bob Proctor does. And I love what I do. I work hard. I study every day. Clients don't just show up at the doorstep. I have to work for a living, but I love what I do. And when we change the way we think, our life changes. So I take people through a program to change their thinking, change their feeling, change their actions, making committed decisions about going after what they really, really, really want. And then it shows up when you change the way you think, the way you feel, the way you act, and you think from the goal already attained. As Wayne Dyer would say, from the wish fulfilled, everything you desire desires you, and it shows up when you stop the resistance, when you allow it to be easy, when you let go of the worry, the doubt, the anguish, the fear, what you're hanging on to, all the mental anguish that you believe might happen, could happen, what if? What if what you really wanted became your life? What if when you let go, you made room for a much more beautiful life than you could ever imagine? When you decide, don't worry about failing, refuse to let unhappy, negative people or circumstances affect you. Because once you make a decision, you will find all the people, all the resources, and all the ideas you need every time. Trust yourself, trust God, trust the universe, trust your decision, trust your abilities. Everything will fall into place. And it's usually much better than you even imagined. I'm going to read another little story to you called The 333 Story. This is also written by Bob Proctor. It's a personal story that he used to tell in seminars. And this was written back, he tells a story that happened back in 1985. He was conducting a seminar which ran from Thursday night to Sunday at the Deerhurst Lodge, a resort property which is a resort approximately 100 miles north of Toronto, Ontario. On the Friday night, a tornado swept through Barrie, Ontario, a town about 40 miles south of Deerhurst. The tornado killed a dozen people and did millions of dollars worth of damage. On the Sunday night, Bob writes, as I was coming home, I stopped the car when I got to Barrie. I got out on the side of the highway and looked around. It was a mess. Everywhere I looked, there were smashed houses and cars turned upside down. That same night, another gentleman, Bob Templeton, was driving down the same highway. Bob Proctor and Bob Templeton had never met. However, he says, an idea from my seminar was about to bring us together in a lasting friendship. He stopped to look at the disaster just as I had, only his thoughts were different than my own. Bob Templeton was the vice president of Telemedia Communications, a company which owned a string of radio stations in Ontario and Quebec. As he stood there viewing the disaster, he thought there must be something he could do for these people with the radio stations he had. That thought kept returning to his mind that night and all the next day. The following night, I was doing another seminar in Toronto. Bob Templeton and Bob Johnson, another vice president from Telemedia, came in and stood at the back of the room. They were evaluating my seminar, trying to decide if I could help their company reach its goals, which I ultimately did. Because of Bob Templeton's influence, I subsequently worked for the entire Canadian broadcasting industry. He loved what I was doing in my seminars because it was in harmony with his way of thinking. Bob Templeton became fascinated with the laws of the universe, particularly the law of polarity, or as it's often referred to, the law of opposites. This law clearly states that everything has an opposite. You cannot have an up without a down, hot without cold, or in without out. By the same token, if you can figure out why something you want to do cannot be done, by law, you must be able to figure out how it can be done. People who accomplish great things are aware of the negative. However, they give all their mental energy to the positive. After the seminar, Bob Templeton went back to his office. He told me it was late, but this one idea he picked up had him excited. It also had him committed to the idea of raising millions of dollars and giving it to the people who had been caught in that tornado. And he was going to raise the money immediately. Furthermore, he was not remotely interested in why he couldn't. The following Friday, he called all of his executives at Telemedia into his office. At the top of a flip chart, in bold letters, he wrote 333. He said to his executives, "How would you like to raise $3 million 3 days from now in just 3 hours and give the money to the people in Barrie?" There was nothing but silence in the room. Finally, someone said, "Templeton, you're crazy. There's absolutely no way we could raise $3 million in 3 hours, 3 days from now." Bob said, "Wait a minute. I didn't ask you if we could or even if we should. I just asked you if you would like to." Bob Templeton was wise. He was appealing to the charitable side of their nature. It was important for those present to openly admit that this was something they wanted to do. Bob Templeton knew that his new idea could show anyone how to accomplish anything they wanted by working with the laws of the universe. They all said, "Sure, we'd like to," then drew a large T underneath the 333. Divided the page in half, basically. On one side, he wrote, "Why we can't." On the other side, he wrote, "How we can." Under the words "why we can't," Bob Templeton drew a large X. As he placed the X on the flip chart, he said, "Now there's no place to record the ideas we think of which explain why we cannot raise $3 million in 3 hours in 3 days from now, regardless of how valid those reasons might be." He continued by explaining, "When anyone calls out an idea which suggests why we can't, everyone else must yell out as loud as they can, 'Next!' That will be our command to go to the next idea. Ideas are like cars on a train. One always follows the other. We will keep saying 'next' until a positive idea arrives." Bob smiled and continued to explain that opposite the X on the other side of the flip chart, directly under the words "how we can," I'll write down every idea that we can come up with on how we can raise $3 million in 3 hours, 3 days from now. He also suggested in a very serious tone of voice that everyone will remain in the room until we figure it out. We're not only going to think of how we can raise $3 million immediately after we generate the ideas, we're going to execute those ideas. There was silence again. Finally, someone said, "We could do a radio show across Canada." Bob said, "That's a great idea," and he wrote it down under "How We Can." Before he had it written down on the right-hand side of the flip chart, someone said, "We can't do a radio show across Canada. We don't have radio stations across Canada." Since Telemedia only had stations in Ontario and Quebec, you must admit that was a pretty valid objection. However, someone in the back of the room, in a rather soft tone, said, "Next." Bob Templeton replied, "Doing a radio show is how we can. That idea stays." But this truly did sound like a ridiculous idea because radio stations are very competitive. They usually don't work together, and to get them to do so would be virtually impossible according to the standard way of thinking. All of a sudden, someone suggested you could get Harvey Kirk and Lloyd Robertson, the biggest names in Canadian broadcasting, to anchor the show. These gentlemen were anchors of national stature in the Canadian television industry. Someone clearly spoke out again, saying, "They're not going to go on radio." But at that point, the group yelled, "Next." Bob said that was when the energy shifted. Everyone got involved, and it was absolutely amazing how fast and furious the creative ideas began to flow. That was on a Friday. The following Tuesday, they held a radio marathon where 50 radio stations from all across the country agreed to work in harmony for such a good cause. They felt it didn't matter who got the credit as long as the people in Barrie got the money. Harvey Kirk and Lloyd Robertson, the TV personalities, anchored the radio show, and they succeeded in raising $3 million in 3 hours within 3 business days. You can see, you can have whatever you want. All things are possible when you put your focus on how you can and say next to every idea, why telling you why you can't. This might be a difficult exercise in the beginning. However, when you persist nexting any and all negative concepts, the flow of positive ideas will roar into your marvelous mind. Alfred Adler, the renowned psychologist, coined the extraordinary phrase, "I am grateful to the idea that has used me." There can be no doubt that creative, forward-thinking ideas literally breathe new life into every fiber of your being. They awaken a part of you that you never even knew was sleeping. Bob Templeton never received 5 cents for the leadership role he played in marshaling 50 radio stations from across Canada to raise the $3 million for the people of Barrie, Ontario. However, you must remember that this is truly an extraordinary universe. God's way of running this show is exact. When you put out good, it must come back. Proctor shared this story with two friends of his, Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen. They were so intrigued by the 333 story, they published it in their book, Chicken Soup for the Soul. When Bob Proctor was doing a satellite TV broadcast for Remax Real Estate with Mark Victor Hansen, he was telling Proctor that at last count, they had sold 6 million copies of their book. Well, that was back in 1985. He also told me they are constantly receiving letters from people who read the 333 story and use it to perform similar mental magic in their lives. Think of it. Millions upon millions of people are making positive things happen in their lives because Bob Templeton would not listen to the reasons why he and his staff could not raise $3 million in 3 hours, just 3 days after they began to brainstorm the idea. When you set up a force for good, that will follow you wherever you go. Begin at once to 333 all of your wants, and profit will follow you. Decide what it is that you would love. You might try this exercise on the left-hand side of the page where you would normally write all your reasons, excuses, doubts, and fears, all the reasons why it could not happen. Put a big X and then think of all the ideas that could work. Write how I can on the right-hand side of the page. Get quiet, take a deep breath in, and write. Bob Proctor would say, write your goal in the present tense using positive language. Put it in detail. And as you really feel it, you feel connected to the energy of the universe. You're thinking from the goal already accomplished. Write down how you can. Write down anything that comes to mind, no matter how ridiculous it sounds, and other ideas will start to flow. And then as you start to take action, all the people, resources, and ideas you need will start to show up. You start to take baby steps, and the universe will show you giant leaps of how it can work. It happens seemingly by magic, but it happens because you stop thinking of all the reasons, all the excuses, and get rid of the negativity and allow an open channel of beautiful new ideas to flow into your marvelous mind. It works. Try it. Create a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me in this morning mindfulness practice. And if you love these ideas, share it with someone else. Thank you. I'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 7. Create a wonderful day.